Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from the vicinity came to him, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word, so his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel."
Healer of our every light of each tomorrow, give us peace beyond our fear and hope beyond our sorrow.
The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment.
Healer of our every light of each tomorrow, give us peace beyond our fear and hope beyond our sorrow.
2 weeks ago, we began a 3-week series on considering a few of the miracles that Jesus performed. First, we remembered that Jesus, after feeding more than 5,000 people with only 5 loaves and 2 fish, was not interested in rescuing his disciples, but rather he wanted them to have faith even when the demands and challenges to doing that which God calls us to do, doing those things which Christ desires that we do, seem overwhelming, that we can have faith and trust that God will provide in some way. Last week we heard an account of Jesus walking on the water, and we concluded that Jesus walks on the water not to prove his power or his divinity or his authority, but rather to remind the disciples that they indeed can and should trust in him, even when they find themselves in circumstances that are frightening, even when they find themselves worrying about their own comfort and their own life. Christ is with them. He invites us to come and trust and believe and get out of the comfort of those things which we trust more in than God. Today we hear yet another miracle, how Jesus heals the sick, but today's miracle story is not your usual miracle story. It's one that Jesus performs among a foreigner, not among the lost children of Israel. This miracle is special, unexpected, and involves the healing of a Canaanite woman who approaches Jesus. She asks him to heal her daughter, whose life is being possessed in some radically terrible way. We in the church would never question God's miracles being offered to those who are faithful. And many of the miracles of Jesus are witnessed among those who are members of the Jewish community. This is the community in which Jesus was raised, and he spends much of his time among them, teaching them, preaching, healing the blind and the lame, who are totally dependent on the community are healed and restored to their position. No longer dependent on everyone else, but becoming a person who is able to provide for themselves and for others. The demon-possessed are given back their lives and they become witnesses of God's power, and Jewish lepers are healed and they are allowed back into the community which they have been separated from because of their disease. Jesus heals many. But today's miracle is not the norm and has an unusual beginning. First, Matthew tells us that Jesus was in the region of Tyre and Sidon. The residents of this area are descendants of the Canaanites who lived in Palestine when the Israelites entered into the Promised Land. And so first, this miracle takes place in and among foreigners or Gentiles or non-Jewish people. There, a Canaanite woman, a non-Jew, a Gentile, comes seeking Jesus. Another strange and unusual situation. Though she is not a Jew, she addresses Jesus like any good Jew. She says, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David." This suggests the Gentile woman believed, or at least wanted to believe, that Jesus, a Jewish rabbi and Messiah, could heal her daughter. She calls out to Jesus, asking him to have mercy on her and heal her suffering daughter. A similar miracle comes to mind for me. Earlier in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 8, verses 5 through 13, we hear of a centurion who has the same hopeful faith in Jesus. He even tells Jesus just to give the word. And I know, he says, my servant who I love will be healed. Jesus is struck by this Roman soldier's faith, and yet he is a foreigner, and a foreigner that many Jews did not like. But Jesus acknowledges his great faith and announces this. He says, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. I can just imagine that a few Israelites there within earshot began to wonder, well, why is he saying this Roman has greater faith than anyone in Israel? Today's miracle healing differs from the healing of the centurion servant. In today's reading, Jesus seems indifferent, even reserved about responding to this Canaanite woman's request. Seems unlike Jesus, or at least unlike the Jesus I like to believe in. First, Jesus ignores the woman's urgent request, and then he reminds her that his first priority has always been to care for the people of Israel. At this point, I want to page forward to another miracle story, but it would do us good to stay engaged in this story. Because the next thing that happens is amazing. This woman who Jesus, it seems like, snubs and says, you know, you're not my first priority. This woman, she remains persistent. She reminds me of the woman in the parable of the widow and the unjust judge, this judge who really doesn't care about justice. But this woman comes to him and presents her case. And when he turns her away, she comes again. She's persistently presenting her case to this judge until the judge finally refuses to do what he always does, and he grants her justice. The Canaanite woman refuses to give up. Even when Jesus tells her he was sent only for the lost sheep of Israel, even when he says to her response, it's not good to give the bread to the dogs. Wow, at that point, I think I would have said something that I regretted saying to Jesus. This doesn't sound like the Jesus we know or think we know. Was he just having a bad day? I don't think of Jesus allowing a bad day to deter him from his mission. Or at least I don't like to think of him in that way, but what if Jesus, like you and me, gets overwhelmed with sadness or the need? We know Jesus would get angry, and just a few verses earlier, we hear Jesus calling the disciples dull. Are you so dull? And when he says this when they ask him to explain the parable that they don't quite get. Does it really matter if Jesus has a moment here and there in the bigger, larger scheme of things? Though he feels and expresses the same human emotions, he remains strong in God's mission, doesn't he? And Jesus sees the great faith in foreigners. We've seen it before, even when he begins his public ministry in his own hometown, Nazareth. And he reminds them that there has been greater faithfulness in foreigners than in those in his own hometown. And they become angry. And they run him out of town. They want to throw him over a cliff, but somehow he mysteriously escapes. In the Old Testament, I'm reminded of Abraham, who God comes and says, I'm going to destroy Sodom. There's just too many bad things happening there in that city. And Abraham says, well, if there were 50 righteous people, would you terminate them along with everyone else? And Abraham stays persistent all the way from 50 down to 10. And each time God says, well, if there are 10 righteous, then okay, I'll spare the city. The Canaanite woman is desperate to find healing for her suffering daughter, and her faith in Jesus keeps that hope alive. We need a faith that keeps our hope alive, even when we're up against something we don't think we can get through. She believes in Jesus. She believes that there's a miracle possible through him for her daughter who's suffering. Isn't this the definition of a miracle? I said earlier, a week or two ago, that a definition of a miracle, or one of the important things, is that miracles come when life is overwhelming, when we don't know what else to do. We've tried everything else. This woman trusts in God when all else has failed. She believes life can be better, even though the odds are against her, even though she's an outsider, even though there are people, including Jesus, saying, you'll need to wait. The Canaanite woman did not have a lot in her favor, but she never gave in. The good things of God, you see, are offered to all people. They're not determined by where we were born. They're not determined even by what we have done. They are relevant to our faith, not in a magical way, For faith is believing in something we cannot see or know for sure. Perhaps, especially for those who have fallen away from the church and the Christian community, those who feel broken and beyond repair, those who are forgotten and ignored or detested, perhaps Jesus died for and loves them just as much as all of us in this room. In the end, Jesus sees the depth of the Canaanite woman's faith. She refuses to take no from an answer, even from... She continues to believe God's will be good for her and her daughter. And she believes in her heart that even the leftovers that fall to the ground will be sufficient. My friends, this kind of faith is the greatest faith. It's a faith that we hold on to even when life seems impossible. A hope that floods our lives even when we find ourselves knocking on heaven's door. A faith that readies us, makes us attentive to miracles, the miracles that God brings about. They can be as simple as what happens to our body when we have a cut. What an amazing, miraculous thing. Let us pray. Oh God, give us the faith of the Canaanite woman, a foreigner who, even when she is encouraged to leave, stays. Give us the faith of this woman that we too might never stop calling out for the healing presence and spirit and power of God who journeys with us from birth until we draw our last breath and then beyond. Give us that kind of faith, Lord, that allows us to get up out of the boat, out of our familiar, safe surroundings, and trust more in you. Give us this kind of faith, Lord, for it is in having this faith that we find the abundant life, truly abundant life. Amen.
I'm committing this day to you. Not one thing's gonna stand in my way. I'm committing this day to you. Oh Lord, I'm committing this day. I'm committing this day to you. Not one thing's gonna stand in my way. I'm committing this day to you. From the start, here is my my soul. From the word go, here is my soul. My strength, Lord of my strength. All that I do, here is my strength. My strength, Lord of my strength. All that I do, here is my strength. Oh Lord, I'm committing this day. I'm committing this day to you. Not one thing's gonna stand in my way. I'm committing this day to you. I will seek you, Lord, I'll seek you. I will seek you, Lord. I will seek you, Lord, I'll seek you. I will seek you with all of my heart and all of my mind, all of my soul and all of my strength. Not one thing's gonna stand in my way. I'm committing this day to you. I'm committing this day. I'm committing this day to you. Not one thing's gonna stand in my way. I'm committing this day to you. Oh Lord, I'm committing this day. Not one thing.